Oi, oi, it's your boy, Jack Slack, Fights Gone By podcast, and these are the ones you live for, lads. These are the ones. Tony Ferguson versus Charles Oliveira. Basically going to be creaming my pants over this fight today, and possibly talk about others, but mainly about this. If you're wondering where I've been working on the Filthy Casual's Guide to Charles Oliveira. Watch it while you can. The content ID on this one was a massive bitch, so I had to pull every trick in the book to make the footage unrecognisable, basically. But you get the gist of what's going on. But then that's the great thing about being independent. You know, this is how I work. If there's a fight that I like, I will pour my heart out and just take the whole week talking about it. And I think people appreciate that, rather than me just churning out shit about every fight in equal proportion, like they're all worth the same. And they're not. You don't think they are. You know, you might be excited about Figueiredo versus Brandon Moreno, which I am. You know, they're good fighters. You might be excited about some of the other shit that's on this card. I know it was Kevin Holland versus Jacare. But you're mainly excited about Tony Ferguson versus Charles Oliveira because you're a fight fan and it's unavoidable. So I'm going to make reference to several things today. Filthy Casual's Guide to Charles Oliveira, which is up now that you can go see. Filthy Casual's Guide to Tony Ferguson, which I think I put in the community feed on YouTube. And an article I wrote for the Patreon boys called Absolute Masterclass, Oliveira versus Lee, which focused specifically on that fight, which I think we can all agree probably Charles Oliveira's best showing to date. I mean, it wasn't like a rapid-fire submission like some of these, but he went through some interesting phases in his career, and I was about to say we'll talk about that today, but let's talk about it now. Charles Oliveira, Tony Ferguson, kind of similar on the surface. In fact, like I'll probably call this episode like Bizarro Tony Ferguson or something like that. But they do have a lot of similarities. They both are known for being very dangerous, even off the bottom. Both are very good at submitting people. Both excellent from the front headlock. Certainly nowadays, Charles Oliveira. Well, actually, he's always been a forward-moving, pressure sort of guy, but he's started to look more and more like Ferguson, leaning back, short checking hooks, and then big pounding front kicks to the body, tiring people out through pressure, forcing bad shots, grabbing necks off that. You know, there's actually, yeah, you know, I would say that there's not another Tony Ferguson and there's not another Charles Oliveira. In fact, I think I ended the last, the Filthy Casual's Guide to Charles Oliveira by saying if they had 12 of this guy, there would never be a bad fight card. But they are very similar in those regards, but even then there are differences between them. Like if you talk about the front headlock, both very, very competent from the front headlock, both use a trinity of attacks from there. Well, the main trinity of attack, is it a trinity? Quadrology? What was Alien? But, you know, basically, when you have the front head, and we're talking about the front head either standing or on the ground, but it's differentiating from like grabbing someone's head when they're grabbing your leg or something. But when you've got someone's head on your chest or whatever, and you're sprawling back to put them on the mat, there are four things you really... Well, let's divide it into three things that you really wanted to be looking for. One, guillotine. Two, head and arm of either variety. You can add Peruvian necktie and shit like that, but that's kind of gimmicky bullshit. It just doesn't go in as well with the rest of it. But guillotine, head and arm, go behind. And the go behind is the part that most people miss. And that's great you see Tony using because obviously very successful wrestler. But Oliveira does it too. Like the trinity of attacks from the front headlock work because you're not going, I just feel like submitting this guy with a head and arm. If he's not giving you the arm, you're not going to get it. So you have to go for the neck or you have to go to the go behind. If guys reach for your legs and try and complete a takedown or come up, that's when you go for head and arms. Or you pull the arm forward with your front headlock. There's lots of variations where you catch the arm in as well, and then you either put your head in the armpit or you put your knee behind it and you turn around behind them. So you can do go-behinds if you get them really extended. Or if they keep their hands in and they're not reaching for your legs, you can go for the throat, which is something that obviously doesn't exist in wrestling. Or you can go for the go-behind. Actually, in wrestling, they used to use the grobbit, the old Wigan grobbit. I need to go to Wigan at some point and find... Well, there is still a snake pit there, so I should check that out at some point. But the grobbit is a front face lock, as you would know it in pro wrestling. You know, it's where you use the blade of your forearm on their cheek rather than their throat, because choking was illegal. But snapping people's necks was fucking... That's the weirdest thing about catch wrestling. Break anything you want, but don't you choke him. That's poor sportsmanship. But you got those, you know, your basic three. The thing that really... one of the main differences between the two is Oliveira's, while Tony is known for being able to go to his back, Oliveira is much more willing to jump to his back. Like, even against, well, Jeremy Stevens, he comes out and pulls, he grabs a hold of him, swings himself onto the fence, and dives for guard, and then spends the whole round trying to armbar him. He tried the same thing against Max Holloway and tore his own esophagus trying to pull guard. He doesn't do that so much anymore, but he's a lot more comfortable going to his back than Ferguson. Well, certainly Ferguson. I would say Ferguson actually makes the more responsible decision to not just jump on his own back. Speaking of which, I was going to start this episode. I forgot because I've got so much going on, but I was going to start this episode with I'm Matt Wyman and this is Pulling Guard in 2020 within the Jackass theme. Because what was he thinking? I was just thinking this the other day because I was watching all of Oliveira's fights, and Oliveira throws his jumping kick or whatever, gets turned onto the fence, and then he stands there with his legs even, like level, and he doesn't spread his base or start fighting the takedown. He's almost like, I just want to be pulled down into guard. But guys jumping guard on the fence, as in like jumping up and locking their legs around people, that has never worked. Never. I mean, the rare exceptions are people like Gianfredo Pepe jumped a flying triangle on, was that Andre Fili? It was on someone. But jumping guard on the fence while the dude's upright, he's just going to put his forearm in front of your throat and then jump on you. And it's happened to so many. It happened. Who did Sarah Kaufman do it to? Gerald Harris did it. I've seen it so many times because you get into this position, or you're upright, and the opponent just puts their frame between you and them, and then you can't break full. You can't keep your head off the mat as they jump forward. But returning to Charles Oliveira's game and how it differentiates from Tony, even in their similar aspects, one of the things is that he's very willing to jump to his own back, and that comes out in partly like the Bronx choke, or the Bronx choke, I can't remember what he calls it, but where he digs the Anaconda Grip, which is the arm going from neck to armpit rather than armpit to neck. Think of it this way: to dast someone, you have to move around to the side. You literally can't dast someone from in front of them. You can move back to in front of them afterwards. That'll probably put more pressure on the choke. But you have to go around to their side to get behind their arm. The Anaconda is a head-on choke, which is why, as I showed in the Filthy Casuals guide, he gets sucker dragged off it a lot. You put your arm deep on a front headlock, even if you're starting to lock a choke, the other guy can shuck his way past you. Andy Ogle did it to him. One of Andy Ogle's few highlights in the UFC, to be honest. But when he does a Do Bronx choke, he doesn't roll, he doesn't gator roll on the Anaconda, which is what a lot of people do. And some guys like Rice Bale now over, like roll you back over, but he jumps up and pulls guard over their arms, and then almost inevitably they roll over the top of him, or they get stuck there and he tries to choke him like he did Hioki, Brookins. He's got a few guys with it, but he's also rolled a few guys over and ended up in top position and then gone for the guillotine. And his guillotine's quite interesting because it's I used to call it the fucked up wrist guillotine because it's how I do my guillotines, which is saying them correctly, guillotine. Now I will alternate just so you know that I'm smart, but I'm also from the street. The Luta Livre guillotine is the S-grip. Actually, the reason that I know this is a Luta Livre guillotine, or it's called a Luta Livre guillotine, is because I've been going through some of the lesser-known instructionals on BJJ Fanatics, thanks to Craig Jones, and my boy Joe at BJJ Fanatics, who basically let me do Supermarket Sweep, if you had that in the US. But yeah, they were like, just knock yourself out. So I decided to go and find some of the weirder instructionals. Everyone knows about Danaher's instructionals and Gordon's and Lachlan Giles. But I went to the weird section of BJJ Fanatics and I found some by they got my boy Mansour Barnui to do an instructional on the Giggler Sweep, which is pretty great. And lots of other interesting stuff. I'm going to talk more at length about that stuff probably next week. But I thought, won't take the piss, won't just grab everything that they're letting me have a look at. I'll do a few at a time and I'll just talk about them on the podcast if I find good things. And I especially want to look at people who maybe they're not the biggest names in the jiu-jitsu world at the moment, or they're specialists or something like that. People who, Randy Stanky. Is Stinky? I don't want to say Stinky in case it's not Stinky. But Randy Stanky, he's a coach at, I think, maybe the MMA Lab. He's a coach somewhere. But amazing series that he's got on BJJ Fanatics. And, you wouldn't be the first thing you clicked on if you went to their website. So I think it'll be fun to talk about some guys who are less well known. But anyway, back to talking about the guillotine and Oliveira. Look at your watch on your left wrist, bring your right hand up in front, thumb pointing at the ceiling, and curl both of them so that you're just catching your fingers, as opposed to gripping over the top of the wrist, which is the classical guillotine finish. But it turns out that's the luta libre guillotine finish, apparently. I mean, there's not a huge difference in styles nowadays with everyone training and competing together, but that's the way that Pequeno Nogueira used to do it, and he was the best featherweight in the world for quite a long time back in Shuto. And then his brother, Leozinho Nogueira, who is awesome guillotiner. But yeah, Charles Oliveira does it that way, with the S grip. The downside is you can't go high elbow with it like Marcelo does. The upside is that you don't fuck up your own wrist, or if your wrist is already fucked up, you don't fuck it up more. I recognise that I'm just gushing at this point, but returning to jumping back on the Anaconda and rolling people over the top, he's happy to sit to guard with the Anaconda, and he's done it with the Das too against Lamas, and that also links in with like his kicking. He likes to kick and get on the guillotine. And he'll get on the guillotine as the guy's taking him down. You saw this loads against Lee, and he'll just he'll go down with it, hoping that the guillotine works. And you don't see so much of that from Tony. Tony's very good at when you shoot on him or you duck in on a takedown, he's going to sprawl out and put you in a front headlock down on the mat. There's Charles Oliveira tends to skip that intermediary stage a lot. He doesn't go front headlock down to the mat. He just goes, "Oh, you've caught my kick. I'm grabbing your neck and I'm falling to the mat." So that's a long-winded way of me saying that though they are very, very similar in many ways, they're also very, very different. They're also significantly different in other ways, in the ways they apply these things. In terms of the striking, again, watch the Filthy Casuals guide, but Oliveira has always had a very, very high guard and stood very tall, which, is conducive to his kicking game. He doesn't have to come up, and he doesn't really have to worry about getting lower than the opponent to deal with shots too, because he's very comfortable grabbing the neck and just falling back on guard. But his defense is almost like we talk about levels of defenses in favorite, how good they are. The best things you can do are like not be there, so movement of any kind, and stuff the strike at its source. If I put my hand over your bicep before you can punch with it, you're not going to be able to hit me. The more that your block comes back towards the target area, the worse off you're going to be, because you're going to be taking more and more of the punch. So hands on the head, particularly in small gloves, which is what Oliveira does a lot, typically very bad. While Tony Ferguson fights with his chin up in the air, he does a lot of moving with punches and rolling with punches and pulling and moving his head. And it's not textbook, but it is probably better than just standing there and covering, because the cover-up has made Oliveira, anyone who's tried to hit his body has hit his body basically for free. And it's... I've not really seen too much evidence that that's gone away. It's more that this is MMA and guys just don't punch the body. And the more pressure he puts on people, the more they're like, "Oh, I've got to knock him out, hit him in the head." Whereas you watch him against like Anthony Pettis, and Anthony Pettis is just moving back. And that was a fight that you would have thought Oliveira would have in the bag, because that was when he went to featherweight and he was cutting huge amounts of weight, but he was just going whole hog in the first round. He was like, "I'm going to finish these guys as quick as possible so that I don't have to stand on the feet too long." And that one, Pettis just shuffles backwards and kicks him in the body over and over. For free. Well, I mean, the guy gets his leg afterwards, but he does kick him in the body for free, basically. Donald Cerrone knocked him out with a body shot. Cub Swanson hit him with a gorgeous left hook to the body, and Oliveira, his whole guard changed. He went from high guard to "Oh no, I'm just hanging my hands around my chest and I'm going for a walk," and Cub Swanson wasn't falling for it. He was like, "I know you're hurt," and just leapt in and hit him with an overhand and knocked him down. And that was the end. And then Frankie Edgar also beaten up with body shots. And Max Holloway also, that was a very short fight, but he was already getting to the body. And I was like, oh, this is going to be bad for Oliveira if it goes long. And that's what's curious about that fight with Kevin Lee. He looked so composed and smooth. And I'm watching clips of it, and he's moving just back out of the range of punches and things. But I'm also thinking, he's still not moving his head a lot. And he's not hand fighting an awful lot. This is just a little bit. And I feel like a lot of it's him benefiting from just his confidence overwhelming Lee and Lee fading. He looked a lot defensively smoother against guys. Who were those guys? Fuck. He had this little streak of guys who were less well regarded before that Lee fight. And then, that was why everyone was like, well, he's on a 6-fight finishing streak or whatever, but he's not really beaten anyone top tier. But during those ones, he was looking pretty smooth. Tamer he hit with a stepping back elbow, the old Jojo Calderwood special from the Invicta days, I think. But generally, his defense was looking a little bit better. The beautiful counter and turn he performed on, was it Yargos? Just sparked him instantly. Looked a lot better against Lentz the third time. Man, those Lentz fights, he came in prepared to do like a Granby out of guillotines, where his hip basically opens Lentz's elbow. And in the first fight, he does it out of the guillotine, obviously aware that Lentz has an awesome guillotine. He does it out of the guillotine, comes up on the front headlock and knees him in the face with a double collar tie. And in the second fight, he does the exact same counter and comes up and finishes the choke for the finish. So both times, countering Nick Lentz's guillotine flowed right into the finish of the fight, even though the first one was illegal and subsequently changed to a no contest. But when you compare like his application of pressure to Tony Ferguson's, Tony's certainly, he gets hit a lot, but he's a lot more aware of what's coming back, you feel. And if we talk about Tony Ferguson, there's going to be a lot of people expecting me to say something about how he's getting older and he's taking a lot of damage and stuff like that. And I don't really know. People point out that he's slowed down a bit, but if he's still putting on tremendous performances up to that Justin Gaethje one. I think the problem with the Justin Gaethje one was that in Gaethje you've got a guy who has, possibly the hardest hitter in lightweight, and he got Tony's timing very early, cracked him with a couple of right hands, a left hook. And that's the thing about Tony. I was rewatching my old Filthy Casuals Guide to Tony, and in it I was talking about all the shucking and shaking and jiving and the the salsa back turn body shot on Raphael dos Anjos. And that's when Tony's at his best, when dudes are just like, fuck, what's this guy going to do? When they're backing up with their arms up and they're just like, I don't know what's going on. Where what happened against Gaethje was that it happens to an awful lot of great technicians at some point. It's where the threat of the counter is so severe that it rattles the fighter and his feints and real attacks become further away from each other. That's the difficulty. If you're talking about if I'm standing in front of Israel Adesanya, I don't know if he's pumping his right hip because he's pumping his right hip or he's pumping his right hip because he's about to kick me in the head. The thing that a lot of really good power punching counter fighters can do can make you feel so threatened about stepping in that your feints become obviously feints. And when you're going to step in, you bite down on your mouthpiece and you're like, right, this is the one. And that's really where you're going to get hurt. That's where the whole thing sort of falls apart because the feints don't look like the real attacks and the real attacks don't look like the feints. And that's really what happened with Tony against Justin. You saw him lingering for ages on the outside. He wasn't able to spook Justin with any feints to set up anything else because he hadn't thrown anything legitimate in a while. They're saying throw some sand at him, do an Imanari roll, whatever. And really, he just needed to get something going, something established, just inside low kick, try and jab something. But you get rattled. If there's someone who hits much harder than anyone you've ever fought, Tony Ferguson has fought everyone, and suddenly he's like, fuck, that's really not nice getting hit like that. So a bit of a unique situation with Gaethje, but there's loads of examples of it. Like Matt Brown. I think Matt Brown, when he met Robbie Lawler, if he'd fought a Matt Brown fight, he could have killed Robbie Lawler. But Robbie Lawler cracked him with a counter right hook right off the bat. And then Matt Brown was like, oh, and stood back and tried to technically kickbox. And you're going, that's not your fight, Matt Brown. You need to get in his face. And it works the other way. You'll sometimes see very, very scary punches come undone because the opponent puts so much pressure on them that each punch now it has a lot more riding on it. They're like, fuck, he's going to close in on me again. I better throw a big uppercut at the ceiling. Not the best example, but when Stipe was keeping Ngannou working on the feet, he'd fake a step in, Ngannou would throw a massive punch and then he'd go, oh, fuck, and Stipe would just step back and kick him in the leg. Specifically in this match, though, I don't think that Charles Oliveira is the kind of counter fighter to make Tony Ferguson second guess his career. So really, you've got an interesting meeting of head to head. Who steps back, who gets to put the pressure on? Do they just come together and smash into each other right off the bat and then we get a really interesting grappling match out of it? I don't know, and that's what's exciting me. But it is very much one of those ones where I don't feel Charles Oliveira can fight a backward-moving, counter-fighting sort of battle, and I don't think that Tony Ferguson can do that either. I think they're both... For either one to succeed, the other one has to not be doing what they need to be doing. This isn't great defensive counter-fighter against great offensive swarmer. This isn't even great offensive swarmer versus good offensive swarmer, but he's going to change his mind and do something different for this fight. I don't know if either of these guys can do something different. But they don't know how to have a bad fight, and that's the important thing. I think what's even more interesting is with all the front headlock stuff, all of Oliveira's best takedowns he enters on the single leg. And that's just like giving the front headlock to someone like Tony Ferguson. So even if they want to go to the grappling, they have to go into the other's best part. It's absolutely fascinating matchup. I can only say go watch all the shit that I did on both of them, and or read the shit I did on both of them, and strap in, because I hope it's a fucking banger. Let's talk about some of these other fights, because I've completely ignored them. I've basically forgotten there's fights going on this week, except for Tony versus Charles. So Deiveson Figueiredo and Brandon Moreno, I mean, we just spoke about them. They turned it around in like 3 weeks, 2 weeks? It's insane, whatever it was. Figueiredo obviously coming off that great performance against Perez. Moreno coming off that good performance that was a bit sort of marred by unfortunate ending against Brandon Royval. I think this could be an absolute banger. I'm interested to see what Deiveson Figueiredo is doing here, because obviously we've spoken before about the UFC desperately needing content and just like churning out fight after fight card after fight card. And a lot of these fight cards, they lose so many people that it often ends up being like UFC new. But I don't think there's anyone this card. But I was saying I'm bored of like UFC newcomer versus guy who's been there for 6 fights who just murders them. And I'm also sick of like last minute replacement fights. I just want to see the best fight the best with full camp. You know, it's not that much to ask. But I'd be very interested to see, because Figueiredo, by fighting in quite a short space of time a few times, and by being so impressive in those performances, he's building up a bit of a reputation with himself. Now, I don't know a great deal, how this is catching on with people, because I work in a very niche sphere. You know, I'm in the echo chamber where everyone's just like, isn't Figueiredo great? Put him on the top of the card, you'll sell millions. Then, surprise, surprise, you don't. But if he can break through a little bit with some of the viewership, and I think fighting more often and finishing impressively is going to be a huge part of that, why not just pump through his contract? Because he's probably not very well paid, because they're flyweights, they're not that well regarded by the UFC, we know this. Threatened to go to Bellator, because apparently Sergio Pettis is making bank over there, and he's a very boring fighter most of the time. And yeah, make a fortune if you can. I'd say get through those fights as quick as possible and try and renegotiate. And it's the perfect situation to do that, because I can see the UFC just giving him any flyweight they can find to fill a card, if he asks to, if he says he'll be on the card, and not really like doing that whole. I mean, obviously, if you're the champion, you're still fighting good people, but they used to do that thing where, like, if you were coming up to the end of your contract and you weren't willing to re-sign before that fight, they might find you someone who was just a hellish stylistic matchup. Obviously, not an awful lot of them out there for Deiveson Figueiredo at the moment, but yeah, if I'm him, I'm trying to churn through title defenses to save, quote unquote, save cards, while also getting through that contract. Meanwhile, Moreno, small Mexican goth boy, dude is so pasty. He's not in his fighter pick on Tapology, but he looked like a goth last time I saw him. But yeah, on a great little streak. Perez, but not Alex Perez, Michael Perez. Got that draw with Askar Askarov when Askarov was undefeated, which is kind of like pro wrestling best outcome. You protect you protect the hype train, but you also move this guy on. Kai Kara France, and then Juicio Formiga, forever contender, and then into that Royval fight. And he was supposed to fight Alex Perez in the meantime, but on a great little run. One finish in the lot, but he's pretty. Oh no, sorry, 2 finishes in the lot, but pretty good on the feet, as well as being pretty spectacular on the ground. So good test for Figgy. I think, the problem against Figgy, I mean, he's exactly the sort of fighter that I just said is a nightmare. He's a very hard-hitting counterpuncher who your idea should be like, I know he cuts a ton of weight, and I know he gives himself a hernia on every punch. I want him to work as much as possible. But to get him working, you actually have to convince him you're going to step in. And to do that, you often have to actually step in. So you have to ride the storm of the counterpunches to try and tire him out. I've seen so many guys being like, well, he makes a big weight cut and he throws everything hard, so I should be able to tire him out. And then they don't do anything for 2 rounds. And in round 3, they're like, why is he not tired? You actually have to make the guy work, and that's the hard part. But Moreno's obviously got very strong grappling, so I could see him picking up single legs, mixing things in, making Figgy work. As long as he doesn't stick his head in a guillotine or well, to be fair, that Perez one was pretty weird. That was a bit of a lapse on Perez's part, just missing that altogether. But yeah, if you can keep everything tight and just make some boring, grinding grappling exchanges out of it for the early going, he could probably tire Figueiredo out in the long haul. But the rest of this card, I mean, I don't even know what to talk about first. Oh, Gavin Tucker versus Billy Q. That's a great fight. Billy Q, did he just beat Spike Carlisle? What's he done since then? Oh no, he knocked out Kyle Nelson in his last one. So he's fought twice in the quarantine, living up to his name of Billy Quarantino. But this, I didn't know this one was already booked a while ago, and the whole event was cancelled apparently due to coronavirus. But Gavin Tucker, if you missed it, I made a Filthy Casual's guide to something that Gavin Tucker does. But Gavin Tucker, very interesting striker. When you see him on, he's on. But then when you see him against someone tall, he's not. Because he's 5'6", and there's regularly dudes in this weight class who are like 5'10", 6 foot even. And he just looks, because he does so much cutting angles, floating off to one side, long kicks to the body and things like that. Works a treat on Sam Cecilia or Justin James, who are about his height, just stocky dudes. But when he was fighting Rick Glenn and Sung Woo Choi, yeah, those two tall guys, he looked very against them on the feet. He choked Choi by going to the wrestling, but Glenn really made him look bad. And that fight from Glenn was a fucking banger of a performance. I mean, it's just sad that Glenn never really got that same go or couldn't carry that momentum on. But yeah, he's got this guy who just cruised through a fight with Sam Cecilia with less than 10 strikes landed by Cecilia, and Tucker landed like 60 something. And Glenn just goes, okay, cool, I might be made a fool of for the early going, but I'm going to stick to him. So he just stays on him, and then he catches Tucker going back, dropping his hands, drops him, and then just battered him for the rest of the fight. And Tucker, mad respect to him for staying in there. He took a bit of a pounding after being dropped in like round one. So, but yes, his fight with James was a banger, and that Filthy Casuals guide really just focuses on that one fight because it was so much fun. They're both doing such weird, interesting stuff. Tucker, southpaw, but loves to throw the left straight, shift into orthodox, and then throw the right uppercut from close. So, Dustin Poirier's look, but without the overhand. So that should be good. You got Mackenzie Dern versus Jandiroba, who was the... she submits girls, but she's just not Mackenzie Dern to look at. But yeah, she's a big, strong lass for the weight class, so that should be fun. Tisha Torres is fighting someone who's never been in the UFC before. Sergey Spivak's on the undercard. Chase Hooper. Hey, that undercard actually looks like it could be pretty fun. You've got, a couple of jiu-jitsu savants. You've got Tisha Torres winging axe kicks at air. You've got Billy Quarantino versus Gavin Tucker, which should be great. And you've got a couple of heavyweight bangers. Or a couple of big heavyweight slobs who are going to throw bombs at each other. And then once you start... Cub Swanson versus Daniel Pineda is on the main card too. I can't actually recall a lot about Pineda, but Swanson's getting very long in the tooth. But he's got one of those styles like Fedor for me, where I just enjoy watching him aesthetically striking, even when he's far too old and like losing a step. I just enjoy the way he throws his kicks and punches. Maybe that's just me. Like when he does the left hook stepping up into the left round kick to the body or round kick to the leg. That's such a weird combination, but he makes it look quite pretty in a really goofy way. And then you got Cyril Gane is going to be putting Junior Dos Santos out to pasture, or it could be just Cyril Gane's like prospect loss. It's been a while since Gane fought. I'm always talking about Gane this, Gane that, but really exciting sort of. I want to say like karate boxer, but that term we sort of throw around. It doesn't just mean like he's got a background in karate, because Gane's background is in Muay Thai, but as soon as he came over to MMA, he started fighting from this like longer bouncing in and out stance, and started to look more like a point fighter. Someone who, it's that style of competition where you have to get in, score the point, maybe get out, but it's all about getting there first and coming in from big range to do it, or extended range. And that's what Gane's been really good at. Also switch hits well. What I always say about Gane is that like he looks amazing until he wants to hit with power. And that was what Angelo Dundee said. It might have been Sugar Ray Leonard. He said like he hit really hard when he was up on his toes, but when he stood flat-footed and tried to hit hard, he was crap. And Gane is like that. He hits perfectly. He hits hard enough to knock you out when he's moving around and worrying about getting hit back. When he's trying to like hurt people and he starts swinging overhands, they look really uncoordinated and like the kinetic chains aren't right. And that would be his the big failing on him is like, not big failing, but like the rub on him is that he obsesses over finishes and then gets sloppy. Whereas he's good enough that if he just put on his usual performance, most people would fall down after a while anyway. But he makes an interesting fight for Junior Dos Santos, because Dos Santos, if there's two things he can do is poke people with a jab and hit pretty fucking hard. Very good on the in and out, not so good on the lateral. But again, Gane is a in an outie, moving around the cage sort of fighter. He's not going to be pushing, he probably isn't going to be pushing Dos Santos to the fence and trapping him like a lot of Dos Santos' opponents have previously had success doing. This is the weird thing about heavyweight. Like, Dos Santos, you put him in with someone like a Francis Ngannou and you go, oh, fucking hell, why did we do that? This isn't 2010 or whatever. But then suddenly he'll go in against Derek Lewis, who's supposed to be one of the top guys in the world, and he'll just embarrass him. The same with Mark Hunt. Mark Hunt was well on the way out the door by the time he met Derek Lewis, and he still made him look a fool. Now, Cyril Gane, a little bit more polished than Derek Lewis, but there's nothing to say that there's not other big holes in his game that might be exposed by Dos Santos here. I mean, don't bet on him, is what I'd say, unless you want to, unless you're happy losing the money. But yeah, I mean, there's a question mark there at least. And if nothing else, Cyril Gane will get a big knockout over a name, which, to be honest, is what he needs because he's got a very pretty style, but he doesn't fight an awful lot, and people have stopped talking about him, including me. And I'm like his biggest fan. Kevin Holland versus Jacare. No idea what to make of this one. Holland's looked good lately. I was gonna do something on him for that Hermansson fight, which I didn't even talk about the Hermansson fight. But yeah, he's started to like straighten things out. He used to throw lots of side kicks and bullshit that got him caught and in trouble, but he's actually started to apply what he knows. Made Buckley look very bad. Meanwhile, I can't remember the last time Jacare fought. Was it Hermansson? Oh no, it's Jan Blachowicz, but 2 fights where he basically couldn't get going. He had that like weird boxing match with Weidman, but really he doesn't get going unless he gets on him early, dives after the low single, runs up to the fence, takes him down from there. He's a very front-loaded grappler. Kind of like the worst of Oliveira at featherweight, but less technical in the takedowns, to be honest. I mean, I'll never write off Jacare because he's a very dangerous man, but we're getting very late in the day. And it's been over a year since he last fought, so yeah. And then finally, Henato Moycano versus Raphael Fizzaiev. Terrific fight. Moycano is interesting because he's sort of like a good striker for MMA, but Fizzaiev is a good striker for striking. So you got an interesting change up there. I think it was very interesting watching Fizzaiev versus Jacare, because Jacare is a good striker for MMA, and those switch kicks started thudding into his arm and body, and he just looked like, oh, haven't had one of those in a while. So I'm very interested to see how Moycano takes that. He likes to work a sort of longer range game. He's good with his jab. He's good sort of like pokey, which is more of a boxing for MMA sort of style, whereas Fizzaiev is very much about the power hitting. So interested to see how that works. I mean, if you're Moycano, you want lots of feints to draw out counter kicks and then move in on him, and certainly try and use the clinch and wear on him a bit. If you're Fizzaiev, go after his legs because they're out there. He fights in a long old stance, even though he likes kicking himself. And use the clinch because I think he's one of those Tiger Muay Thai guys, isn't he? So I'd love to see him strike up with the clinch. When you see guys like him, I mean, Petr Yan's from there, they have some of the most interesting clinch work in MMA, like from a striking perspective. Yeah, so top to bottom, beautiful fucking card, mate. Honestly, I don't want to say it and jinx it, but were something to happen and you lost half those fights, it'd still be quite good. But then last week, I think we lost 3 in the space of 10 minutes. It's just getting absurd. America, wash your fucking hands. I mean, the funniest part is that they get tested as they come into Vegas, and then that's like 2 days before the fight, and then they go, okay, go out and enjoy Vegas. Like, what? No! Test them and then pay them to stay in the hotel. Be like, yeah, use the pool, use the gym, whatever, but here's some extra money for your inconvenience. Watch some pay-per-view porn, old school. Enjoy Vegas. We'll pay for you to stay a couple of extra days so you can enjoy Vegas afterwards. But no, the NBA did fucking great with this stuff. The UFC, they did well on Fight Island, but then when they do Vegas events, they're just like, yeah, whatever. It's unbelievable, like the difference between the Fight Island cards and these in terms of them actually going ahead. And there's other stuff going on this weekend too, like Jonathan Haggerty's back. Awesome, over in One. There was a really interesting article published this week about One getting mad at people, and like there was a quote in it that Chattree hates reading anything negative about him. I was really going to have a great laugh with it this episode, but there was too much going on and I haven't read the full thing. But Nikki Holskin is also fighting over there. Errol Zimmerman is still around apparently. So, you want some easy knockouts, go watch that one card. One Big Bang 2, apparently. Why are they doing weird titles and then a number as well, like Enter the Matrix? Just, drives me fucking nuts. Anyway, I will call it a day there because I am absolutely knackered from trying over and over again to get this Oliveira thing to upload. If you haven't watched it, fucking watch it. If you haven't read the Absolute Masterclass Oliveira versus Lee, read that. If you want to get in on the Patreon, support the podcast, please do. If you want to send an email to the podcast, fightsgonebypodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to read what I'm writing anytime, fightprimer.com. I'm your boy Jack Slack. I say again, these are the fights that I live for. Cheers.